We're exploring this vast terrain of the First Noble Truth, right? And an area of our lives where we experience this dukkha, anywhere from irritation to this anguish, is our personal relationships, right? People don't always behave in the ways that we want them to. In fact, sometimes out of a deep, wounded confusion, people can cause a lot of harm through their words and their actions, and we can be the object of that. And it hurts. It's really hard for the heart and mind to receive someone's unskillful, harmful behavior. And we can't control how people behave as much as we want to. And this is a hard thing for the heart and mind to grok. This truth of, I can't control how people behave, and sometimes I'm going to be the object of people's unskillful behavior, their unskillful words, their unskillful actions. Like, that's hard to just sit in the truth of that without reacting. And what I found helpful in just my own practice, when I'm experiencing reactivity or some intense afflictive emotion towards another person, resentment, indignation. I experienced this a lot earlier this summer after George Floyd's murder. What I found that really helped me to metabolize my own reactivity was using my imagination in moral ways to help me to empathize with people that I was, who were behaving in ways that I found egregious. Using my imagination in an ethical way to imagine where they were coming from, right? And by cultivating empathy, we're not condoning egregious behavior. I want to be clear, like, in the aftermath of George Floyd's murder, I wasn't using empathy to condone systemic racism or white supremacy, right? In empathizing with others and cultivating empathy and imagining their circumstances, we're actually not allowing them to walk all over us. We're not inviting them into our lives to cause more harm. We're just simply coming to understand how they've come to where they are, which supports us in mitigating our reactivity and perhaps even touching into some compassion. And perhaps even compassionate action, right? So one of my favorite playwrights is Lorraine Hansberry. She wrote a play called A Raisin in the Sun. And she was just this human who was dedicated to using her considerable gifts as a writer, an activist, a radical, and a thinker to help us name and to help us feel into the caustic nature of racism, the life-denying quality of racism. So I want to bring in a moment from A Raisin in the Sun because it calls on the power of using our imagination in a moral way to help, as I was saying, like, mitigate our reactivity and open the heart to compassion and compassionate action, which are such beautiful inner supports as we mature our relationship to this first noble truth of dukkha. So I have to set up things for you so you'll understand the context of what I'll share with you. So it's the late 1940s, early 1950s, south side of Chicago. The younger family, it's a Black family, and they're in crisis. The patriarch of the family, the father, has just died. So this is a family that's grieving. And with his death has come an insurance check. And it's about $100,000 in today's currency, which is huge for a family that's living on the south side of Chicago. It's African American at that time period. And the matriarch of the family, Mama or Lena Younger, has taken a third of that money and put it down on a house in a predominantly white neighborhood called Clybourne Park. It's a wonderful line where her daughter-in-law says, "Mama, ain't no black people in Clybourne Park." And Lena says, "There are going to be some now." It's a wonderful moment. So she puts down this money on this home in this predominantly white neighborhood. And then her son has all these dreams and aspirations. And she gives him 2/3 of the money and says, "Look, you take a third of it and do with it whatever you want. The other third, I want you to put in a savings account for your sister's schooling, for her college tuition. She wants to be a doctor." And he is so moved by this. He says, "You trust me like this, Mama. You trust me with this money." And she's like, "I love you, and I trust you with this, and I want you to be able to realize your dreams," which were hard for Black men at this time. There weren't the opportunities to live into their gifts. So this means a lot to him. However, he takes all of the money, so his half and his sister Benita's half of the money, and gives it to his business partner, Bobo. Would you trust someone named Bobo with your money? And Bobo isn't to blame. He trusts a third person that they're in business with, Willie Lee Harris. So Walter gives all the money to Bobo. Again, someone named Bobo. I know it's his nickname, but when someone's name is Bobo, that tells you a little bit about who they are. Anyway, Walter Lee gives all of his money to Bobo and his sister's part of the money. Bobo gives it to Willie Lee Harris. Willie Lee Harris runs off with the money, right? In the meantime, Carl Lindner, another character, is a representative of the neighborhood that the Youngers are going to move into. And he comes to them and he pleads with him. He says, "Please do not move into our neighborhood. It will just cause us undue stress. It'll be dangerous for you. It'll be hard for us white people. We will pay you not to move into our neighborhood. We will pay you not to move into our neighborhood. You name the price, we won't move into your neighborhood." And Walter Lee thinks, "I've lost all this money. I'll just recoup it by taking Lindner up on his offer to pay us not to move into this neighborhood." But in order to do this, he's essentially saying, "We'll take your money and we won't move into your neighborhood because we ain't worth nothing. Everything that you think about African Americans is true," thereby denigrating himself and his entire family. So as Walter Lee is revealing this plan to take Lindner up on this offer, he reveals this to his wife, Ruth, his mama, and his sister, Benny. And he's so eaten up by internalized racism that he just disintegrates before their eyes. And it is devastating for these women to see him reduced in this way. So here's this moment from Raisin. And it's, we're being called to use our moral imagination, use our imagination in an ethical way. So Walter Lee is just left. And Mama looks at Benny, her daughter, Everyone's devastated. And she looks at her daughter and she says, you mourning your brother? And Benny said, he's no brother of mine. And Mama says, what you say? And Benny said, I said that individual in that room there is no brother of mine. And Mama says, that's what I thought you said. You feeling like you better than he is today? But you tell him a minute ago that he wasn't a man? You give him up for me? Well, who give you the privilege? And Benny, she loses it with her overdramatic self. She says, will you be on my side for once? You saw what he just did, Mama. You saw him down on his knees. Wasn't it you taught me to despise any man who's going to do what he's going to do? And Mama says, yes, I taught you that. Me and your daddy. But I thought I taught you something else. I thought I taught you to love him. And Benny says, love him? There is nothing left to love. Do you hear what Benny is doing here in this moment? In our reactivity, in our reactivity, we start to divest people of their full humanity. We can call them 3/5 of a human being. We can see them as vermin. We can call them a basket of deplorables. Right? We abandon each other. We stop loving each other. So she says, love him. There is nothing left to love. And Mama says, there is always something left to love. And if you ain't learned that, you ain't learned nothing. Have you cried for that boy today? I don't mean for yourself and for the family because we lost the money. I mean for him and for what he'd been through and what it done to him. Child, when do you think is the time to love somebody the most? When they done good and made things easy for everybody? Well, then you ain't through learning, because that ain't the time at all. It's when he's at his lowest and can't believe in himself because the world done whipped him so. When you start measuring somebody, measure him right, child. Measure him right. Make sure you done taken into account what hills and valleys he come through before he got to wherever he is. Can we use our imagination in moral ways, right? Start to dare to project ourselves and imagine ourselves in someone else's situation, just to understand the source from which their words and their actions have actually arisen. And again, this doesn't mean that we condone their behavior, especially if it's harmful. We're just cultivating an understanding of their suffering. And through caring for their suffering, perhaps a wish to get close to it, to alleviate it. And out of that wish, we move out of the wish for them to be free of their suffering. We move to actually alleviate it, if we can, if the conditions support us in doing that. And the Buddha called this anukampa, compassionate action. So in the face of internalized racism, this woman, Mama, is fighting for her son, her daughter-in-law, her grandson, her daughter, for her entire family. Through compassionate action, beseeching Benny, don't forsake your brother. There is always something left to love. Can you imagine his conditions? Imagine his circumstances. And this has been really supportive for me, and just the political times that we're living in. instead of demonizing people out of my own reactivity, just imagining, okay, what are the conditions that have led to this action? Like, oh, there's a deep and wounded confusion. Deep and wounded confusion. How can I meet that with some care for that suffering and the capacity to widen and deepen the heart to meet that suffering? And out of that, perhaps some the impulse to alleviate that difficulty, that challenge, in whatever way that I can.